Michelangelo, born Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, 6th of March, 1475, in Caprese, nell'Arezzo, Republic of Florence, present-day Tuscany, Italy. It certainly would not be an exaggeration to call Michelangelo the greatest sculptor there ever was, especially if you're talking about marble sculpture. When Michelangelo was in his late 20s, he sculpted the 17-foot-tall David. Michelangelo was known as Il Divino, the Divine One, and it is easy for us to see why. So much of what he created seems to us to be superhuman. This colossus seemed to his contemporaries to rival or even surpass ancient Greek and Roman sculpture. David and his later sculptures, such as Moses and the slaves, demonstrated Michelangelo's astounding ability to make marble seem like living flesh and blood. So much so, it is difficult to imagine that these were created with hammer and chisel. Difficult to imagine indeed. In 1546, at the age of 71, Michelangelo received one of his greatest and the final commission of his life. Pope Paul III appointed him chief architect of the sprawling St. Peter's Basilica. The opulent centerpiece of the Vatican, where popes are laid to rest and home of the tallest dome in the world. Remember, this was initially designed by Donato Bramante, and the building had gone through 40 years of construction, suffering the travails of 5 subsequent architects with different visions before Michelangelo's arrival. Of course, it was left to Michelangelo to pull it all together and create a design for the ages, which he did. Greatest sculptor, great architect, but these are not the reasons that I have summoned all of you here today. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Vatican City and the amazing Sistine Chapel. Today you're going to experience Michelangelo Buonarroti's stupendous fresco program of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican. There are many treasures to see inside the Sistine Chapel, but they all pale in comparison to the main feature for every visitor who comes to visit, and that is the ceiling and its amazing frescoes. The original ceiling, painted, was by Pier Matteo di Amelia in 1433, and it depicted stars over a blue background, much like the one on the screen that you see from the Arena Chapel, decorated by the great Giotto in Padua 100 years earlier. However, the Arena Chapel is a much smaller building than the Sistine Chapel. Fast forward 71 years from 1433 to 1504, a diagonal crack started to emerge in the Sistine Chapel's vault that was painted by Di Amelia, and it grew over a period of 6 months to the point that the chapel became unusable. Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, had the damaged painting removed. Pope Julius knew just the man for the job of redecorating the ceiling. He commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which got started in 1508. Here is a diagram that shows you the organization of the ceiling program. The narrative begins at the altar and is divided into 3 sections. In the first 3 paintings, Michelangelo tells the story of the creation of the heavens and the earth. This is followed by the creation of Adam and Eve and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Finally, the last 3 panels include the story of Noah and the Great Flood. The pink and orange sections around the perimeter of the Genesis series is where Michelangelo has painted the prophets and sibyls, ancient seers who, according to tradition, foretold the coming of Christ in the spandrels. In the 4 corners of the room, the purple triangle, where you see the red triangles covering the purple, one finds the pendentive frescoes, scenes depicting the salvation of Israel. Michelangelo considered himself as a sculptor and later an architect, yet he did not consider himself a painter, and yet that is why I've gathered you all here today to discuss one of his greatest achievements, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. With its elegant nudes and powerful seated figures and the now iconic image of the creation of Adam, Michelangelo reset the standards for painting the human figure as both emotionally and spiritually expressive on its own and not reliant on being a part of a narrative story. Although As you will see, he did narrative painting quite well, thank you very much. The first frescoes Michelangelo painted contained multiple figures. They were the three frescoes that depicted Noah and the great flood scenes. Here we see the deluge, where we see the smaller size figures, where we see Michelangelo painting multiple figures, much smaller than the size figures in the later frescoes, engaged in complex narratives. In this fresco, Michelangelo has used the physical space of the water and the sky to separate four distinct parts of the narrative. On the right side of the painting, a cluster of people seek sanctuary from the rain under a makeshift shelter. On the left side, more people climb up the side of a mountain to escape the rising water. Centrally, a small boat is about to capsize because of the unending downpour and people wrestling to get on board the small vessel. And in the background, a team of men work on the building of the ark, the only hope for salvation. Unfortunately, from the floor of the chapel, the use of small, tightly grouped figures undermines the emotional content, makes the story harder to follow. It is at this point that Michelangelo decides he needs to take a year off and rethink this whole composition that he's got planned for the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So he takes this year off and goes away to work on new drawings, new compositions to re-execute, not to repaint Noah and the great flood scenes, but to re-execute the rest of the ceiling and the frescoes, the rest of the to execute the rest of the ceiling frescoes. The frescoes painted after this break are characteristically is at this point that Michelangelo takes a year off from it is at this point that Michelangelo takes a year off from painting the ceiling frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. He comes back in 1510 after that, taking that year off from painting the Sistine Chapel. The frescoes painted after this break are characteristically different from the ones he painted before it and are emblematic of what we think of when we envision the Sistine Chapel paintings. These are the paintings like the creation of Adam, where the narratives have been pared down to only the essential figures depicted on a monumental scale. This is the end of part one. We'll pick it up from this point tomorrow or maybe later today and show you the rest of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, or at least the most important parts. And we'll wrap it up. Then. See you tomorrow.